Welcome back, everyone, to Vox Markets. My name is Paul Hill, and I'm delighted today to have special guest Jay Lecoq, the Executive Chairman of SourceBio International. That's a leading COVID-19 testing, medical diagnostics, and laboratory services firm. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you, Paul. Good to see you.
A massive congrats on today's oversubscribed IPO, raising £35 million at sort of like a valuation of £120 million. What are you going to spend the money on?
Well, first thing we're going to do is ramp up our COVID testing capacity. We are in a situation now where even though we're doing, we're going to be at 10,000 tests a day, by the start of December, we need to do more, and we need to ramp that up as quickly as we can. It's very difficult to meet demand right now.
And what capacity did you have in September? Because I understand it. I mean, you've basically gone from sort of a standing start at the spring, and then you've responded, admirably to ramp up as much production as you can. And where do you currently stand? I mean, if you started at 0 in the spring, where are you now in September? Or where were you?
Well, I think September right now we're doing 75, 8,000. We did 9,000 last week. If we can push it if we have to.
That's tests
what's interesting
per day,
is we started. No, go ahead, sorry.
That's tests per day, is it, Jay?
Tests per day, right? Tests per day.
Yeah. Okay. So that's tests per day, and you're doing what, 7,000 or 8,000? And I looked on your sort of like the website, and it showed that the average test price was roughly around about £40 to £45. Is that right, or something?
That's about right. That's about right.
Okay, so would it be correct into thinking, in terms of your presentation, you're doing around about a turnover in September of just south of £7 million?
Yeah, that's what we did. That is what we did. I mean, you can do the math on the numbers, and you can just do the math on it. I think September we were an average of 5,500 tests, something like that. So the budget was lower. We beat the budget, but so that's how you can run the numbers on that.
Yeah, and so you said you were going to, what are you trying to hit by the end of the year, say December or even Q1 next year in terms of volumes?
Well, I'll tell you, all the research right now says 10,000, and that's all we're going to commit to. But I can tell you that we're going to try to do more to support the effort.
And what do you need to do more? You're obviously going to spend some money from the fundraise to give you the capacity. Is it an equipment? Is it space? Is it people? Or
it's a little bit of all of those, but the number one need is working capital. I mean, when you're pushing through that many tests a day, you've got millions of pounds in inventory. You need to keep running through the system, and because we've been growing so quickly, our receivables haven't always kept up with our expenses. So getting the working capital to build this up even faster is critical.
And who are you selling it to? Is it largely the government or corporates, or?
It's largely the government. We also got some very big private hospitals that we're supporting. Plus, we've got industry. We've got other relationships besides public and private hospitals.
Okay, and what type of test is it? Is it antigen? It seems to be as antigen rather than antibody tests, i.e. sort of antigen testing whether somebody's got COVID.
It's an antigen PCR test, absolutely. It's you have it, you don't have it test.
And that's the gold standard, I understand, in terms of...
That is the gold standard. That is the gold standard.
Okay. And given that the UK government is sort of like looking to expand its capacity, and they're currently, I think it was the last saw, around about 400,000 tests per day, but they're still getting swamped by demand. They want to go to 500,000, which I think they're struggling, but getting somewhere close this week. But you've heard this moonshot of literally millions of tests they want to do per day and spending £100 billion. I mean, if you can develop greater capacity, presumably the demand's there.
Demand is absolutely there, especially for the PCR test. I mean, there are other tests that are out there, not as accurate. They don't necessarily tell you if you've got it. So we're confident that if we build capacity, the demand will be there. And with respect to the moonshot, I mean, that's a nice goal. But really, it's gonna need to be executed properly to get anywhere near there.
And how long is this going to last for? I mean, obviously you don't know because it depends how long it's sort of like we're going to get a treatment. But I mean, most sort of experts are suggesting that, frankly, we won't have broad-based vaccine in the best condition, in the best case, available until sort of like at least the second half of 2021, which means that only COVID testing to get the economy back is just absolutely essential, isn't it?
Yeah, but let me unpack that a bit. I mean, yeah, certainly the vaccine is coming. And I think initially the thinking was it was going to be the panacea. It was going to be like a smallpox, polio vaccine. That's no longer the thinking. The thinking is, this is going to be, 50% effective, 50% of the population is going to use it. Antibodies only last 4 or 5 months. So, you need to really figure out how effective this is going to be. And we'd all love to see a vaccine, no doubt. But we're looking at this being, I think the government's even made a comment that they're going to fund this now into March 2022, could be longer. We're looking at it from a perspective of it's going to tail into 22, and certainly if we can't get it under control, it might even tail on longer than that.
And presumably, even if it goes on to tail on to 2023, 2024, certainly the way I'm looking at it and modelling it is such that actually, this, in high contact areas, in the healthcare sector, in people who's in essential service, having to visit houses and airports, as maybe even requirement to travel abroad to other areas, you're going to have to prove that you haven't got COVID, and the only way to do it is through testing, presumably. So, right, and you rightly say, if you've got immunity only lasting for 3 to 6 months, it means that herd immunity isn't actually a solution, because as soon as you start getting somebody immune, they're going to be catching it again and transferring it. So what about antibody testing, Jay? I know that's sort of like, that's not testing whether it's got it, it's whether somebody's got antibodies. But again, people are going to need that for passports and, basically passport testing to show that they've got, and also essential workers, presumably, in the healthcare, that it'll save having to give them a vaccine if they've actually got the antibodies anyway, and the vulnerable. Right. So there's got a massive demand for antibody testing as well.
Well, we've got to be careful about that, though. There certainly will be if you've got an antibody test that actually can give you some information that's of value. And there are a few tests we're taking a look at. One of them in particular quantifies the level of antibodies that you've got in your body, which could be very useful to say, yes, you're immune, or you're immune for now. You don't need a vaccine. That would be a very useful test. That's not available right now, but that is something we're taking a serious look at.
Oh, great. Okay. And then it's sort of like, if you push the clock a bit forward and you do have, you ramp up capacity and then have a bit of spare capacity, can you reutilize that capacity for testing in other tests? This won't be the only pandemic. It won't be the only virus that we're going to have to test for. Is there any way of reutilizing that resource in your existing business going forward in, say, year 2 or 3?
Yeah, absolutely. We're already looking at panels that have other diseases, the flu, whatever. We could definitely use the equipment in our business elsewhere. So no, we're not concerned about that at all.
Okay. And then sort of like, turning to the sort of the base business, this is obviously all extra income. If you do 10,000 tests, that's roughly a week, etc. That runs at sort of like, 10 million, it must be 10, 12 million a month, in terms of revenue. But you're on your base business, you did 20 million of turnover alone last year. And I know obviously it's been impacted slightly by, the COVID side of it, with the elective procedures. But how are you seeing that going forward in terms of sort of broad brush organic growth rates over the long term for those businesses?
Well, that's a really good question. First off, we've got 3 parts of our business. The first is this cellular pathology work that we do for the NHS and private hospitals. Certainly that was impacted by the COVID situation. Elective surgeries pushed back. We're not doing much testing. That impacted that business fairly significantly, which is one of the reasons we decided to get into the COVID business to sort of hedge against that. We didn't have any idea how big the COVID was going to be at that time, but that was the strategy behind us getting into COVID testing in the first place. So that will come back once this COVID situation becomes a little bit more manageable. And the government's just announced a pretty big program to use private hospitals to help with that backlog. We think that's going to help the business. So that business will come back. That business has grown 40% the last 2 years before COVID. We were up 80% in Q1 before COVID. So we're expecting that's not only going to come back to the prior levels, but even more because of this bolus of backlog, this backlog of cases. Our genomics business certainly got hit a bit in Q2, but that's now bounced back. So we're seeing that come back to actual normal levels. And then we've got a stability storage business, which is really, contract. Our clients contract with us to store their samples, in different environmental conditions. Those are 3-year contracts. That's a stable business, very high gross margin, recurring revenue. That's barely been impacted by the COVID business.
So essentially, what you're seeing then is if you do see COVID sort of testing sort of fall off or soften off in sort of 2 to 3 years time, that turnover is likely to be replaced by a demand spike of elective surgeries that are required because, as you mentioned on your first part of your business, etc., the medical diagnostics. I mean, if it does cancer screening, is that, and sort of samples and anything which is you'll look at slides of people, sort of biopsies and stuff like that.
Right. Whether it's pre-op or post-op, you've got to get a tissue sample. NHS, private hospitals send that tissue sample to us. We then slice that down, prepared for pathologists to take a look at and prepare and conduct a diagnosis.
Okay, and so just if you add those three sort of businesses together, if you consider sort of recurring under contract and repeat revenues, which you'd normally expect outside of a pandemic, presumably most of that business it's repeat or recurring revenue streams under contract or just ongoing samples, presumably.
Well, it's certainly in the stability storage business. It is contract. The average contract 3 years. That's definitely recurring. Plus, we've got some repeat business. So the stability storage business is about 90% recurring revenues. On the pathology side, we've got great relationships with multiple NHS trusts. We've got SLAs in place, which means the work is going to keep coming. But really, they're loath to sign an official contract because they don't really understand how much volume they're going to have at any given time. And while we've historically been more of an outsourced provider, an overflow provider, we're now working with them on a partnership level and helping them with some of the more complex cases that may be coming through the system, especially with this backlog of cases.
And the sort of the growth drivers, presumably, in your medical diagnostics, it's the classic sort of like, aging populations, better diagnosis, better treatments, which is obviously plays to that. And then is it the genomics, personalized medicine, making sure
Yeah, I mean, the personalized medicine aspect of genomics is very important to us. In fact, because we've got the expertise in cellular pathology, we're going to bridge those two together and create a pretty unique offering that is not likely to be, replicated by anybody that we can see in the space right now. And certainly on the cellular pathology, why that's growing is certainly, there's advances in medicine, but there's an increasing shortage of pathologists in the UK, and so they just can't handle all the work that's coming through. So we step in to help that and alleviate that vacuum.
And how does the digitization of those sort of like screens help, help the business in terms?
Well, as we talked about the slides earlier, it'll get rid of the slides. So now you've got a digitized image you can send immediately to a pathologist. You don't need to pack them up, put it in a courier, get it to the pathologist. He's got to unpack it, put it on his microscope. So it makes it much easier. Turnaround time is much faster. Our costs go down. And then because you've got some AI capabilities on a digitized system, you can screen out some of the base cases immediately and then have our pathologists work on the higher level complex cases, which is what they prefer to be doing anyway.
Okay. And then on the storage side, the sort of key drivers, presumably the sort of the biotech businesses, the farmers who are doing drug discovery, they put in a sample into your storage and want to make sure that it's stable over a certain set period to make sure to meet FDA requirements. Is that the right? And so the more drug discovery they do, the more they're going to require your services.
Exactly.
And what about international growth? Because I noticed, obviously, you're big in big in the UK. You're even bigger now with COVID-19 testing, and you're well established in Ireland and obviously in the US. What about elsewhere in continental Europe, in Asia?
Well, I think look, we're not that well established in the US, and I think we're taking a serious look at expanding there. It's the biggest market. Very solid pricing, demand is there. Certainly, we'll take a look at opportunities where they would make sense. But we're I think overall we're going to focus on the UK and then US, Ireland. Certainly there might be some opportunities as well. A lot of pharmaceutical manufacturing going on in Ireland that we could step in and help manage.
Okay, so post IPO, then you say you just raised 35 million. You're going to spend a bit on sort of the increasing the capacity of COVID-19. That'll leave you, I presume, just running the numbers, looking at the balance sheet and stuff. That'll leave you roughly cash neutral on a pro forma basis, broadly anyway.
Right.
That obviously then gives you, because you're going to be EBITDA positive, certainly over the next few years. That gives you capacity to raise money if you need to for M&A. What sort of like areas would you look for acquisitions to complement your sort of geographical fits and obviously your skill sets?
Well, that's a good question. We certainly have a process to look at acquisitions. It's got to be accretive, very quickly. We got to have profitable growth, cash flow, strong management teams. There's a lot of things we look at with respect to acquisitions. Likely, it's going to be more bolt-ons and extensions to our existing business. I don't see us buying something completely new. There aren't the synergies there if you do something like that. But there's opportunities to grow in the UK. There's opportunity to expand in the US. There's opportunities in Ireland, as I said earlier. So yeah, we're looking at, we've got a small universe of opportunities that we're going to take a serious look at in 2021.
And how the scalability of these businesses, presumably they're quite there's strong barriers to entry, etc. They've got people and skills and stuff, and therefore it must be pretty scalable in terms of the more you put on the top line, the more drops through to the bottom line, I guess.
Yeah, you can say that. I mean, it's a modular growth. You can grow at increments of whatever 1,500 or whatever samples a day. You can grow it in a modular rate. And yeah, you're absolutely right. When you've got a fixed cost lab, once you get above a certain level, you're dropping it all to the bottom line.
Okay. And I mean, I'm going to put my investor hat on here because I'm personally interested in SourceBio. And I was just sort of like looking at the base business. And if you've got I have long-term time horizons, etc. But if you assume a sort of 15% organic growth rate on your base business, you double your turnover from 20 to 40 in sort of 5 or 6 years. If you assume for these similar businesses, I don't know, 25% EBITDA margin, given the operating leverage you've got on it, you get 10 million of EBITDA on a 12 times EBITDA multiple. You get 120 million just from the base business by waiting for about in 5 or 6 years, which is equivalent to what you've just listed in. So if I was just being sort of like putting my investor hat on, that presumably says the COVID testing business is in there for free as upside.
You could look at it that way. I like that analysis, though. Your multiple's low. I think we should be at a 14, 15 multiple, not a 12, but we'll leave that for another day.
And that's because you're growing faster than the market, because admittedly, the base business, most medical diagnostics are not growing at double digits, etc. So
right. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, the COVID business was valued at 1 times cash. So really, the important thing for us to do in an acquisition is buy a business that if it's got a 14 multiple or even a 12 multiple, it'll equal the amount of cash that we generated on the COVID side, and it should be a big upside for investors.
Yeah, I mean, I can't understand a 1 times multiple on the COVID cash because it's going to carry on for ages, that is. And as a worst case, you're going to utilize the equipment you've just bought for other detecting to create a new revenue stream. So it's a very prudent assumption. But anyway, sort of like just coming to the end of the interview, I was just wondering, what about sort of the news flow going forward? What are you sort of like, is the next trading update going to be the year end, or do you anticipate sort of like announcing new contracts for COVID, for instance, or are you going to talk about sort of like how things are progressing towards the 10,000 COVID tests per day target, that sort of stuff over the next few months?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure we'd announce if we got to 10,000. We can do that pretty easily. That wouldn't be super news. But let's just, without overselling it, yeah, we are definitely working on some developments that may be announceable before the year end. So we're still working very hard to continue to expand the business.
Okay, well, big congrats again on an excellent IPO. And the market yesterday was down hard, so there hasn't many sort of like companies have managed to do that. So a big thumbs up from investors, and I strongly recommend investors have a good look at this business. I'm certainly going to run the slide rule over it when the detailed P&Ls come out. So thanks again.
No, thank you very much. It was a huge effort by a lot of people. I just want to thank everybody who was involved, and it was a great exercise, and I think we're all pleased with the result.
Yeah, we'll look forward to hearing how things develop over in due course. Thanks, Jimmy.
Absolutely. Thank you.